Hello, everybody. Up to date. My wife is finishing the newsletter as we speak, so that I'll be mailing it out this coming week. There is a new bulletin also coming out, as I just sent Quadgraphics the postage, so watch for those two things in your mail, because they should be coming out shortly. Also, now our program director has the flu, so I'm going to step in for him. Our schedule, David Saums is going to be our presenter today. And then on February 8th, Rick Kafuri, our newsletter editor, is going to be discussing the Manchester Lawrence branches on February 8th. On March 14th, 2020, Justin Winniars is going to do images of the Winland trains in the 2017-18 year, as well as Southwestern California tourist and short lines. Denver to Cheyenne. April 11th, we're still to be announced yet. And May 9, 2020, we will return to Plymouth, New Hampshire, and the program's still being worked on. Otherwise, David, I think we're ready for you.
Okay, great. A little slow on the draw here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're drawing the race.
That is correct. I was wondering if anybody would comment. All right, those don't want to function. Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Last time we did this, we didn't have much fun with the microphones. I was in Plymouth in October 2018. Working? Good. I shouldn't stand in your way, should I? Let's see. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let's see if we can have some fun with this. My thesis for this presentation is that if we think about January of 1931, it was the depths of the Great Depression, very different situation than we have today. Relatively speaking, few people had cars. Those people who did have cars did not drive them in the winter, generally speaking, if they could possibly avoid it. They certainly did not go on long trips to the mountains asking for trouble. So I've titled this Online Dating 1931. And my vision is, imagine if you were 27 years old, living in Boston. You had a job, but it was the Depression. A lot of people didn't have a lot of money. If you could walk over to North Station on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, and for a very reasonable price, get on a train that was going somewhere up there, and it was called a snow train, whatever that was. If you can imagine that, boy, that must have been great for dating. Oh. Okay, my clicker doesn't want to work. Good. Because I forgot to put in the gizmo, that's right. That would help. Let's see if that works. Okay, so generally speaking, Boston, Maine was the first to conceive of the concept of a snow train. And the term snow train was, of course, something that people did not understand or recognize. Today, we all know what it means. You might think it's a ski train, but it isn't, because people didn't go skiing at the time. Skiing wasn't a sport that most people did. Simply couldn't afford to, didn't have the equipment, didn't have a store where they could go to buy the equipment easily, and you had to go to Switzerland to take lessons. A little difficult. So when the Boston, Maine introduced the snow train, they had to explain what it was. And generally speaking, if we think of this as not a ski train, but a train to the mountains, a train to the hills, a train in the wintertime for some fun, even if it means just sitting on the train all day in the dining car, which, if it were 10 degrees out, doesn't sound too bad to me. Snowshoeing, ice skating, yes, some very basic downhill skiing, some cross-country skiing, but it was the Boston, Maine snow train that literally kicked off the snow train concept. It spread across the country very quickly, and especially in New York State and New England, with a number of railroads. It was the B&M, though, that started this. I want to start by showing this coin. This was issued as a bicentennial coin by the town of Warner, New Hampshire. And what's interesting is this is the front side of the coin, and it shows in the background it's labeled First Snow Train, January 11, 1931. The town of Warner is quite proud of this. Last winter we had a presentation in Warner on snow trains, and there's an event being organized this year. It'll actually be a series of events in New Hampshire organized by a group of historical societies talking about, amongst other things, snow trains. I didn't show the back side of the coin. On the right, this is a badge, I happen to be wearing it, which the Boston, Maine issued. I assume this was done for one of the longer weekend trains that had a higher ticket price, because this was probably a fairly expensive coin. It was made in Attleboro Falls. I'm sorry, the coin was made in Attleboro Falls. The badge has a clip on the back, and my guess is that it was meant to be issued to people as they bought their tickets, and you could wear it to prove that you actually had paid for your ticket. Okay, snow trains. The B&M certainly took something of a risk in attempting this concept. It exploded in popularity, and I think many of us know that. There were also a series of posters issued, at least one each year. I happen to like the graphics and all this stuff. So I've got a lot of this kind of thing that you'll see in this presentation. This apparently is the first poster from the first year, 1931. I've put together a table here of some dates for the sequence of events, at least as best as I can tell. January 1931, the first snow train to Warner, New Hampshire. The Southern Pacific began what they called snowball specials running up to Truckee in 1931-32 through the same winter. I would like to point out that the 1932 Lake Placid Winter Olympics also did a lot to spur interest in downhill skiing in the United States and Canada. Look at how quickly other railroad companies picked up the concept. Chicago Northwestern, December of 1933. The first ski tow was installed in Woodstock, Vermont in 1934. And yes, someone wrote to me this morning to berate me about my postings about this presentation today, apparently thinking that I was claiming that the first ski tows were in New Hampshire, and Woodstock, Vermont might take umbrage at that. Apparently that first ski tow is going to be reinstalled next year in the farmer's field. The New York Central ran their first snow train to Phoenicia in the Catskills in 1935. This is a particular interest to me because I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in the, well, let's say the lower Hudson Valley area. And the Phoenicia station still stands. It's now a railroad museum, in fact. The New Haven ran its first snow train in 1935. The B&M by 1936 ran a schedule of 36 snow trains across New England and carried 24,000 passengers. In the same year, the New York Central carried 30,000 passengers in all the snow trains that they had operated. The Central Vermont ran their first snow train to Waterbury, Vermont in 1936. Some more dates. I don't want to go into these in great detail because there's just too many of them. Union Pacific built the Sun Valley Resort in Idaho, very popular, very well known, which opened in 1936, and so on and so on. You'll see quite a variety of different railroads were operating snow trains during the 1930s. So this concept spread from January 31 on the B&M very quickly across the country. The last snow train, 1956 on the B&M. Oh, and during the war years, there were no snow trains operated. So sometime in the 1941 season, the B&M and other railroads stopped operating snow trains as soon as the U.S. was involved in World War II. And those did not start again until 1946, and in the case of the B&M, 1947. Railroad enthusiasts ran their first snow train in 1964, the last one in 1972. And Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts has continued to operate snow trains. Here's a list of some of the destinations that the B&M ran in New Hampshire. My point in putting a table together like this is just to explain. If you think of the logistics involved in how many trains were being organized, it's rather substantial operation that the B&M assembled. And if you've seen some of the brochures, as the years moved on, the brochures got thicker and thicker, up to 50 and 55 pages, because there were so many different destinations and so many weekends that these trains ran. This is a map that's not very good. I used this when I gave the presentation in Plymouth, and I realized it didn't reproduce well on the screen, so I've got another map I want to show you that I've added. I'd like to emphasize again the impact that the Lake Placid Winter Olympics had, not only on Lake Placid and the Adirondacks, northern New York State, but also on the furthering the interest in skiing, downhill skiing in the United States. Now for some photographs. Brian Jennison was going to come with me again today, but unfortunately he couldn't come at the last minute. And he chastised me last time and said, you know, people had to wait 10 minutes before they saw a photograph of a train. You got to put a train in up front. This came from Kalmbach Publishing, and Dwight Smith has this in his collection also. Snow trains at North Conway, sometime just prior to World War II. Don't know the date, unfortunately, for this particular image. This is North Station with 3 snow trains shown, the hotel to the right. And my comment here is that the fact that there were 3 snow trains and the depth of the schedule simply tells us how popular these trains immediately became. I mentioned logistics. This is an example of a bulletin order, 1935. This was for a snow train running in March to Canaan. It gives the outlines of the equipment that was involved, a baggage car that was set up as a ski shop, 3 coaches, and then a diner, and apparently 7 additional coaches would be available if, depending on how ticket sales went. I think many of you may know that the B&M also did something that was quite innovative. They had a deal set up whereby they were able to put on the radio in the Boston area what the snow conditions were. Was that Thursday night for trains leaving on Friday? Does that sound right? I think that's the way it ran. Pretty neat to be able to coordinate. Maybe you didn't have to do as much coordination as you have to do today. 60 degrees today and it's January 11? Holy cow. That would really screw up a snow train. This is just one example of one bulletin order with some of the logistics for what was involved in just operating just one train in 1935. I mentioned that the concept of snow train, people didn't know what that meant. You'll find in some of the early brochures that there are actually paragraphs describing, and there's a title that says, what is a snow train? So the B&M launched into, as part of their publicity in the brochures, explaining what these were. Here's an example of one advertisement showing, this is January 1940, and it does say snow conditions permitting, but these are trains leaving from Worcester, going to Plymouth, and going to Fabian, New Hampshire. This is an example of the baggage car that was set up. Oh, sorry, is this a baggage? No, it's not a baggage car. This is a coach. I'm sorry, this is a coach. But the interiors of baggage cars, the New York Central did this also. There was a baggage car on many of these trains that was set up as a ski shop and also snowshoes and skates. There were companies like the Armstrong Company in Boston. There was another company in New York that the New York Central worked with, that the Haven worked with, that equipped these baggage cars. These are some publicity photographs. These I've gotten from Dwight Smith. Dwight's been very good about sharing his photographic collection. And I just chuckled over this because I just think this is great. This is B&M publicity at its best. You notice the very pretty young blonde on the left and the man in military uniform. It's 1946, the war is just over, in the cab of a B&M Pacific. Wonder why. Well, lo and behold, another publicity photograph. Here's the same young woman, and here's, well, the same man now with his overcoat on. I would say these are a set-up deal. These are publicity photographs staged by the Boston, Maine. Who was the publicity man for the B&M? George Hill? Hill, yes. Yep, thank you. More photographs at North Conway. and the same two young people are out in front. And I think it's noticeable that people did not have the elaborate and expensive ski wear that seems to be absolutely required in the brightest colors today at the greatest expense. Many people were wearing their uniforms from the war. Again, people, different era. People didn't have the money to go out and spend $1,000 on a, what's the brand? Canada Goose something? Coat. And another one of these photographs, you can see the North Conway Station on the left. I made a comment that there are also people included here there are women wearing skirts, dresses, and shoes, and they're not carrying skis. And up on top of the, what's now been labeled no longer as a school bus, but now the ski-mobile, there's a wooden enclosure built to carry skis to the slopes. Okay, beyond the B&M, the snow train concept, as I said, spread very quickly. It got as far as Chicago Northwestern. In this case, this is a broadside from Great Northern. You see at the top a B&A broadside. Here's the new map I added. I wanted to do a better job of trying to describe where these various snow trains ran in New York and New England. And this is, again, very quickly. You saw in the table of dates that I had that other companies, other railroad companies, were operating snow trains very quickly, literally within a year after the B&M started. The B&M covered a very large territory in terms of all the destinations. The Boston and Albany also ran some connecting snow trains that connected two B&M snow trains running out of South Station, B&A trains running out of South Station. The New Haven ran, and this is actually from a New Haven brochure, the New Haven ran up on what was the Housatonic Division, Great Barrington, South Lee, which would be Stockbridge area, Pittsfield, and North Adams on the B&A. I grew up, well, just a few miles from the Bronx on the Harlem Division, but then ultimately, when I was in high school, we moved to Hillsdale on the Harlem Division with the railroad right outside our front door, and there was a ski area in town, there still is. The New York Central ran trains to regular service trains to on the Harlem Division, but they also ran ski trains, snow trains, to Phoenicia and Pine Hill in the Catskills. The Central ran with the D&H trains to North Creek, also New York Central trains to Saranac and Lake Placid and Jay. The New York Central also ran either via the D&H or via the Adirondack Division to the Canadian Pacific connections and then up to Quebec, the area around Quebec, Sainte-Marguerite, and Saint-Agathe to ski areas there. I'm a New York Central fan, lifelong New York Central fan, so I'm sorry, there are a few New York Central things in here. Yeah, Mohawks. Here is a B&A broadside, and I thought you'd find this very interesting, because this is not the kind of thing I find that we often notice. Typically, B&M Society, we talk about B&M trains. Don't talk about B&A trains. But look what was going on. Connecting coaches to the B&M Special Snow Train. The B&A ran out to Framingham, connected in this case, and this was a trip to Wilton and another one to North Conway and Intervale. I thought you'd find this interesting. Dining car from North Station. So that would suggest, I presume, that's a B&M dining car running out of North Station. Here are some of the New York Central snow train destinations. Adams on the North Adams branch of the B&A, Farnham's, North Adams. In the Catskills, Fleischmann's, Highmount, on the Harlem Division to Hillsdale, where I grew up. In the Adirondacks to Lake Placid, etc. And then also there were some trains that ran some winters via the New York Central to a connection for the Rutland for snow trains to Arlington, Manchester, and Burlington, Vermont, and then also to Quebec. Now, in some cases, the New York Central also showed Canadian snow train destinations with not only the CPR as an interline, but also the Rutland. And I cannot figure out why they included the Rutland, because there's no evidence that it was a Rutland operation involved. These are some examples of New York Central brochures that were published. These are some from the Catskills. This is, I thought, also quite interesting. Very strong point made about the very first international snow train going up to the Laurentians via the Canadian Pacific. And quite a reasonable price by our standards today. Another map showing, I've got a series of these just to break this down a little further. New York Central and Canadian Pacific operations. This one is 1946, coming up from Grand Central Terminal in New York all the way up to Montreal and to Quebec, to ski areas such as Mont-Tremblant. In the Catskills, in the Adirondacks, a number of ski areas on the Tug Hill Plateau. Thendara is not far at all from Utica, very easy to get to, so that would have been a relatively short trip from Grand Central Terminal. I assume there may even have been connections from Buffalo also coming east and then up the Adirondack Division, but I've never found any evidence of that. And you certainly could have done that on regular service trains. Via the D&H to North Creek, and I mentioned already via the Rutland to Manchester, Arlington, and Rutland. More, B&A, Ulster and Delaware to Big Indian, High Mount, Fleischmann's, Phoenicia. On the West Shore also there were snow trains run even to Bear Mountain. Not that Bear Mountain was a particularly large hill, but still it gave you the opportunity to take a relatively short trip relatively quickly. This is on the Ulster and Delaware. This is from John Hamm, who just published a book in last August on the Harlem Division. He's also the king of Ulster and Delaware narrow gauge operations. And if you ever want to see his house, don't look in the garage. Oh my gosh. Hard to believe how many signs he has from the old Ulster and Delaware narrow gauge operations in the Catskills. These are, this is a snow train here at the Phoenicia station, right in the heart of the Catskills. Another brochure. In this case, I circled both Pittsfield and Hillsdale, the town I grew up in. Catamount was the ski area at the time. Catamount is still in operation right on Route 23. It straddles the New York-Massachusetts state line. This is the station in Hillsdale. This is what I grew up with right in front of my house. The creamery is still there. The station was burned down by some very nice young urchins in the 1980s, unfortunately. Here are some photographs I found somewhere long ago of a snow train unloading. It's a Harlem Division snow train. There are buses that have been brought in to pick people up at the station and carry them to the Catamount ski area. This is the railroad hotel that was directly across the street from the station and from our house. And here are more of the skiers getting on the buses unloading from the Harlem Division snow train. This is one of my photographs of one of the last Harlem Division passenger trains. There's the station in the distance. Just very quickly, this is one of my own photographs also on Washington's birthday weekend in 1972. There's less than a month to go for service, but these are skiers unloading, and our neighbor's garage is right there. It's literally right in front of our house. On the New Haven and the Central Vermont, oh, there we go. Sorry, might be losing my battery. On the New Haven, there were a number of destinations for snow trains also, and the New Haven did the same thing the B&M did, published brochures every winter and posters every winter with a variety of destinations, as you see here. Some of them in concert with the B&M. For example, if you lived in Providence, you could take a New Haven train to Worcester. You could also take, on some trips, you could take a New Haven train to, I think that was to Framingham? And then a connection. This was a poster. There are two versions of this poster produced by the Central Vermont. The second one has a very attractive young woman wearing a skirt and a blouse that seems to only have one button. I don't really understand how she could go skiing in that, but very stylized.
A day like today.
A day like today, right. Yeah. Absolutely. I've spent many a day at Stowe, and not skiing, just in the area. I use Stowe as a base for chasing freight trains around Vermont. This poster was reproduced as a fundraiser for the renovations to the Waterbury, Vermont station. In the other version of the poster, you'll see the Waterbury station in the background with the Waterbury station name. And my friend Les Skagengus was the architect who did all the work for the station renovations to restore the tower that had originally been on the station. It's an Amtrak station today. Very nicely done. The Rutland did not run many snow trains. These were the destinations. I've got an example of a broadside for Winter Carnival for Middlebury. Here is a lineup of people awaiting a returning train at the Manchester station. Notice again, though, that many people maybe are not there for skiing. Maybe they're just taking advantage of the fact that the train was operated to go and spend a winter weekend. This came from the Manchester, Vermont Historical Society, a photograph. Don't think we know, we don't know the destination, and it appeared to be both Rutland and New York Central coaches mixed in. This is something that was handed to everyone who had a ticket who was boarding the Rutland snow trains. This is from January 1938 from Bill Badger, who's a member of the Manchester Historical Society and very involved. Manchester, Vermont. Sorry, Rick. This is quite a detailed document, and if you were to read through it carefully, you would see that there's a reference to a variety of houses in town. This was not uncommon at all. When the B&M ran the first Warner snow train, residents in Warner had been recruited. If you had a spare bedroom, you got a snow train enthusiast. And you also were given the menu to prepare, and everybody, all the houses, had the same menu, so everyone got the same dinner that night. I mentioned last winter in Warner there was a snow train presentation. The dinner that we were served was the same menu from the January 11, 1931 snow train. I just thought that was great. But the idea that people opened their houses to complete strangers to let these skiers come in. Not sure they knew what skiing was. Anyway, there's more of it. The Manchester Winter Sports Club was also heavily involved in this effort. This is a long New York Central broadside. It's too long to show the whole thing because it shows a number of destinations. I just love these broadsides. This one is for Manchester, obviously. And I put together this table to show, just to give an idea of what kind of fares were available. You could ride to Burlington or to Rutland or to Manchester in a drawing room if you so wished on the snow train. I just... Apparently not everybody was suffering in the Depression. Manchester Station with a sign on it that was there for years and years and years that read Manchester Ski Center. I think that sign was still there maybe even into the early 70s. I've forgotten. I'm the editor for the Rutland Railroad Historical Society magazine, and I did a 3-part series of articles. So these are examples of those 3 issues on snow trains. And since the Rutland ran only a relatively very small schedule of snow trains and only for a few years, I had to cover a good deal of other topics, which included the Boston, Maine, the Central Vermont. Okay, in the 1930s, the snow train concept was an immediate hit. The ridership erupted. The schedules erupted in terms of the number of trains that were run. In some cases, there apparently were multiple sections for some of the trains, especially on Sundays. The fares were relatively, at least to us, they certainly seem reasonable. But please remember that when these started, it was the Depression, and the Depression lasted for 10 years, and then the war. So these prices, $1.50 for a one-day excursion as a round trip, might seem to us very reasonable, but may even then have been a bit of a stretch for some people. I mentioned the Armstrong Company, that they had a baggage car set up as a ski and ice skating and snowshoeing shop. So you could have your skates sharpened, you could have work done on your skis, etc. And very typically, some form of food was available, a diner or a snack car of some kind. And very often, apparently, the diner would be available all day long. If it was a one-day round trip to, let's say, Conway, North Conway, the diner would be open for business all day long. I said earlier, it sounds pretty good to me. I wouldn't have minded just camping out in the diner. Some of the towns involved also got very deeply involved in organizing, so there were dances, there were ice skating parties. These were not just ski trains, which is why the term snow train was used. This is something that I found somewhere a number of years ago. I'm not aware that there was ever a snow train that ran to Derry, New Hampshire. Was there a woodbound inn in Derry?
The only woodbound I know of is in Jaffrey.
Okay. And this sure looks like it's either an Alco PA or a Fairbanks Morse cab. Well, it's an amalgamation. I think it's artist's creativity.
Actually, the PA was patented after the sea liner.
This is the original artwork, and apparently there was never a poster made of it. And if there was some thinking by the B&M that they were going to run to somewhere near Derry, that apparently never happened. It's only about this big. It's the original artist's artwork, and you can easily tell because you can see, if I had it here, you'd see all of the, well, it looks like whiteout, but at the time it wasn't whiteout. And the logo is just laid in. That's just pasted in there. It's an old mechanical paste up. This was an issue of Model Railroader magazine. Jim, do you still have copies of the new two-volume, the new two-volume paperback? Do you still have those? Okay, good. This is December 1988? Yeah. My friend George Drury did this article about the North Conway station and B&M snow trains. Unfortunately, George has passed away, which is a real shame. I must say, I really miss him. He was a marvelous man. And if you recognize his name, he was the librarian, the corporate librarian for Kalmbach Publishing for years, until one day he was walked to the door. He had the letter from a vice president who will remain unnamed at Kalmbach pinned to his office door in his house. He resented that treatment until the end of his life. He was very bitter about it. It was very unfortunate. Anyway, this was drawing from that same article in Model Railroader. Here's the article. If you find a back issue, if this is of interest to you, it's just a great article, quite detailed. The B&M published posters. I mentioned this also. I don't know the year for this one. These were also then turned into the covers. The later posters certainly, but some of the earlier ones too, were turned into the covers of the annual brochure that was published by the B&M each winter. I know a number of you have some of these. I've got a pile of them from different years. I've slowly collected them over time. These are from the 50s, using a photograph as the cover. I don't care for these with photographs. The ones that I like are in fact, for the Plymouth presentation, I brought one of the very early posters. I've never seen the poster anywhere else. I've never seen it reproduced. And framed, it stands about this high. I have it hanging on the wall in my den, but I brought that for the Plymouth presentation. It's just a stunningly good graphic done in the early 30s. This is another one of the 1950s brochures. The employee magazine for the B&M also had references to the snow trains, but not that much information about the snow trains that the company was running, which I find rather surprising. I haven't been through every issue, but Brian Jennison has collected almost every single issue who's ever published, and he went through them all for me and sent me the ones where he found references to snow trains or skiing.
The two issues that have articles on it are April 1931 and April 1932.
Cool.
One's by the B&M talking about their snow trains.
Yeah.
And then the second one is, which I believe is the 32 one, has an article by one of the people who rode the train.
April 31 and?
Yeah.
And what was the second?
April 32.
Cool, good. I think we have an expert in the room. Great.
I thought I sent you those.
Yeah, you might have. I got about 30,000 emails. More of the B&M employee magazine. These are tickets. These are all later tickets, not any from the very early trains. Carl Byron very kindly pointed me to this photograph. This was an example of a snow train that was run on a chartered basis, so this was not open to the public. And if I hear noise and people like BL2s, I do too. They were damned ugly locomotives, especially the butt end. I have a couple of gorgeous black and white medium format negatives of BL2s on branch lines in New Hampshire, and they are just marvelous beasts, I think. This was run for the John Hancock Life Insurance Company as a private charter. So this was a company outing as a snow train on the Boston, Maine, February 1950. I'm sure many of you recall and know about this, the day that a snowplow derailed ahead of a snow train, February 1965. Got as far as Mount Whittier, never got any further than that. These are some medium format transparencies that I had collected showing the RRE snow trains at the North Conway station. A beautiful, beautiful winter day. I suppose not many people in the room will agree with me, but I absolutely love winter, and the older I get, the more I love winter. So I just love a day like this. This is from Brian Jennison. I'm sorry he wasn't able to come today. Brian lives in Newmarket. If you recognize his name, he and Don Marson had done a 2-volume set of books, hardcover books on railroads of the Pine Tree State. And he's doing a series of books on Southern Pacific divisions at the moment with Vic Neves. This is in Dover, New Hampshire. North Conway, 1970.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Gorgeous, gorgeous images. This is from Scott Hartley in Connecticut, 1971. This is another one of those medium format, just beautiful transparencies. What a spectacular day. And I'm sure you know immediately there's the turntable pit to the left. Doesn't look like much right now, but boy, it's nice to see what Dwight was able to do in North Conway and the people since then. Absolutely marvelous that we have such a treasure. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have a date on this image, I'm sorry. I'm going to guess somebody here might have a good idea, but I don't. 72?
71.
71?
I would guess 71, because 72 you had the Jeeps.
Jeeps up front?
Yeah.
Like that?
Like that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm guessing 70, 71, because it did snow heavily.
Yeah, all right. So this is the February 72 trip. This is, you may know the name of Bob Wilt. He's very well known for his Lehigh Valley photographs. I don't know who James Harold is, but Bob Wilt had this in his collection. These two Jeeps were on the head end to buck snow. This is from Dave Hutchinson. Dave isn't here, is he? Yeah. No Dave. Right. So these are the GP18 and the GP9. There's the GP18 getting ready for the return. This is a Douglas Kidd photograph, February 1972. Am I correct that this is the last snow train operated?
Yeah.
Okay. And was this an RRE trip? Yeah, okay. All right. Sorry, folks, I'm not from these parts, so I don't have this ingrained in my blood from the time I was about this high.
Don't worry, you're doing an amazing job.
All right, well, thanks. Isn't this a great image? Why can't we have more of this today, please? I'm sorry. Uh-oh. Another map, again, for the Plymouth presentation, because I was assuming there would be townspeople in the room, I just wanted to show a map with Plymouth located on the map. This was a very nice article by John Gruber. Don't know if you'll recall Locomotive and Railway Preservation. It was a wonderful magazine. I'm sorry it's gone. This is a Ted Rose watercolor on the cover. But this issue, 1995, had a snow train article written by John Gruber. I've got a list of references here where I got some of this material from. Dwight Smith had a B&M Bulletin article in 1980. God love him. He's still going strong, apparently. Last Saturday?
Last Saturday.
Yeah. I wanted to go and I couldn't. That was his engine running again.
Yeah.
Well, it was his engine.
Yeah. And, well, it's named for him now.
Is it? Yeah.
He was riding the Gertrude Emma, which was named after his wife.
Oh, was he? Yeah. He just keeps on going.
Yeah. I tell you what, he looks better than I do, I think.
Yeah, well, I think he's going to look a lot better than I will if I get that far. The George Drury article that I mentioned is Model Railroader, September of 1988. It is out of print, but if you go to one of the dealers and magazines, or if you go to eBay, you can usually find these things. I've got a long list of contributors for people who, Jeff Browse from the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, Scott Loths is the director of the CRPA. They both were very helpful in some of the longer distance, not from New England discussions. John Hamm, I mentioned in Hunter. Quite a few people answered questions for me. I mentioned that I'm the editor for the Rutland Society magazine. We have 4 issues a year. Membership is $20 a year. And we have an annual convention. This year it will be in Bellows Falls. If anyone is interested, please see me afterwards. Usually we get 85 to 100 people at the convention, and it's a really nice group and a really nice time. I have 2 dedications here. One is John Gruber. John had the sense to found something called the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. It's hard to believe that this actually has come about. I'm sure you know that Jim Shaughnessy has passed away. Jim Shaughnessy's 90,000 negatives are now all in the archives, being archived and cataloged at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin. And there are a number of other collections there also. John passed away in October of 2018. This was the last book that he worked on. It's an excellent book talking about the lives of Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg. And it is not a whitewashed story. It is the story about Beebe and Clegg, who really did a great deal for us in putting the concept of a railfan and railroad photography on the map. Jim Shaughnessy passed away in August of 2018. I will say in the 7 years that I've been the editor for the Rutland Society magazine, Jim has been absolutely wonderful. I'm very sorry he's gone. I first saw his photographs. My first book that I ever owned was his Rutland Road, and then the D&H. I've been looking at his black and white photographs since I was 15 years old. I went to the funeral, and then I went and spent the next day with John Hamm at his house in the Catskills. The first book that Jim published was The Rutland Road. The last one that was published while he was alive was Essential Witness, published by CRPA. Wonderful books. This is Jim in his library at his house in Troy, a photograph from Greg McDonald, who very kindly said I could use it. Great photograph of Jim Shaughnessy. I met him when I was 15 years old. I took the passenger train at noontime north on the Harlem Division to Chatham. Got off, walked into the station, talked to George Ford, the station agent, went out and stood around in the yard waiting for B&A freight trains, and lo and behold, there was a very imposing, tall man standing in the yard, and doggone it if he didn't have two cameras, and it was Jim Shaughnessy. Anyway, that's my presentation. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your attention. All right. Thank you. All right, thank you. You embarrassed me.
Very good.
What a story, huh?
Yeah.
Imagine if you were 27 years old and living in Boston and single, and you walked over to North Station. I don't know how many people that either saw the first version of this presentation in Plymouth, or since then, when I've talked about this, I don't know how many people have come up to me and said, my grandparents met on a Boston and Maine snow train. And what does that mean? That means the person saying that is alive because of the snow train.
Very good.
Questions, anyone?
You mentioned that there were some 2-day or 3-day snow trains. I didn't know about that. I thought the snow train was to use the equipment on a Sunday when it wasn't primarily being used.
Yeah. If you examine the brochures, as far as I can tell, there were, you notice the reference to people's homes, for example. In Warner, the very first trip, were people staying overnight? I actually don't know the answer about the first trip to Warner, but if people were eating dinner at people's houses, that suggests it's nighttime. It's going to be a very late arrival back to North Station if it's only a 1-day out and back. Clearly, some of the others were multiple days.
And there's also some, you can look in the brochures, you'll see that some of them were like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
right.
Or
That's
Saturday,
the
Sunday,
3-day.
Monday, on holiday weekends.
Holiday weekends, yeah. But they also, the brochures also have lists of hotels in the area, inns in the area. Carl?
My mind just went blank, honey.
First B&Bs.
I'll put my hand up when my memory catches up with my mouth.
Well, think about what this means, though. In 1931, you didn't just get in your car and drive up to North Conway. One, you probably didn't have a car. Two, you couldn't get there. And three, there was no place to stay because what inn was open in the wintertime?
In 31, with the road conditions they were, that was probably a 10-hour drive.
Yeah. It was impossible for most people. Yeah. And no inn owner in his right mind was going to pay for the fuel to keep his inn heated on a weekend in the wintertime, unless he knew somebody was coming. Yeah. So the B&M, to get started, had to go out and do some serious organizing.
I found it profitable. The railroads must have found this profitable.
Well, profitable in what sense? They had the equipment sitting idle on the weekends.
That's what I mean.
And they had crews sitting idle. I would expect the crews were thrilled at the opportunity to earn something on a weekend in 1931, 32, 33.
Yeah, I mean,
it was manna from heaven dropping out of the sky.
The accountants would probably have no facilities amortization in the report at all.
Yeah.
It was strictly direct labor, direct costs.
Yeah. It's what's the cost of advertising, what's the cost of the labor, what's the cost of fuel. Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yep.
I've got a couple books.
Carl, I'm sorry?
The New Haven group has a colored PR snow train movie.
Yeah.
Which is quite nice, done by their PR, I think 46, 47. If you didn't know any better, you would believe that you got on that Pullman at Grand Central and the New Haven delivered you to North Conway.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
The New Haven also claimed in a couple of their brochures, they claim that they're the first. Not quite true.
The other thing for reference with the pricing.
Early 60s.
Yeah.
1939 and 2019, 20 times is the multiplier.
Is it? Yeah.
So the dollar is $20.
Yeah.
That $1.50 trip is $30.
Okay, so it was more expensive than I was anticipating, but still.
Yeah.
If you did it once in a wintertime, it was, what a deal.
But of course, minimum wage was 25 cents.
Yep, understand. Yep. Okay, so a 20x multiplier.
The Skylark, which was advertised on both New Haven and B&M, that came up through Worcester, was one of the routes, and got B&M power from there, and that's the one that went to the North Conway Intervale.
Was it? Okay. Right.
And then they had another one that left out of Worcester that for some reason was called the Skylark that went up the Pittsfield area.
Oh, really?
And as far as the World War II issues, I've got an issue from 41, and the next issue I found was 45s.
Yeah.
So 41, 42, and 45, 46 were the bracketing for the war.
Yeah, and I don't know when the last operation was in 1941. I don't think there was anything by January 42. I think it ended
the brochure
fairly
has
quickly.
Stuff in it,
well,
but that doesn't mean it ran.
They published the brochure, right. Doesn't mean it actually operated. Because December 7, 1941, I can't imagine that people were... I can't imagine the railroad. Maybe they ran in January, but certainly not February, March, I would think. By then it was crisis time.
You mentioned they stopped, B&M stopped operating 1956.
56, yeah.
I'm a little surprised that early, or were automobiles and access to the mountains had dramatically improved, so their patronage dropped off?
And I don't remember what my source for that was,
That's correct.
but 56 is it?
Pat McGinnis came to town.
Oh, all right, yeah.
If you want to run it, you run it. And the
Our great friend.
Yeah, well, one of the things, of course, is to bring in all the RDCs in, and, for every RDC and how many old passenger cars went to the scrap.
Yeah.
2 or 3 to 1 ratio. So whether they had that many extra RDCs to run that at that time frame.
But they would have had RDCs to run on a Sunday.
Well, depending on the maintenance stuff going on. You have to
Yeah,
remember
okay, yep.
how much maintenance is done. The rail cars, how many extras you have if one gets delayed being cleaned
Yeah.
for Monday morning.
But all told, I would think in 1931, the operation of these snow trains on weekends was a boon to employees, a boon to the company, and certainly the public liked it. That seems pretty obvious. Thanks, everybody. There's an awful lot of information, and it's astounding how much